Hi everyone, and welcome to this month's book review. This month is Sacred Sexuality, the Erotic Spirit in the World's Great Religions by Georg Feuerstein. And this is a really great book for anyone that's interested in a brief history of sacred sexuality throughout of the world's major religions, and to find out how we've ended up today in our culture and the attitudes that prevail. So not very long and a good read. So the author Georg is an Indologist who specialised in studying Sanskrit literature and Hinduism, and he published this book in 2003, and the first time he published it was back in the 90s. So it's quite an old book, but still very relevant to today. So he starts by speaking about sacred sexuality as being a gateway which allows us to reconnect with our true nature, which is bliss. And he speaks about the current culture and how we've ended up in the current culture today. So he says that the so-called sexual revolution of the 60s has not necessarily led to everything that it was subscribed to be, and that many people today in our culture still experience what he calls the sexual stress syndrome. And what he means by that is that many people are still having sex which is both unfulfilled and unfulfilling. So it is something that, even though many people might be having lots of sex, it doesn't mean that it's bringing us this spiritual dimension that it can have as part of it. So part of the reason for why we've ended up in this situation is because of the legacy of the Christian doctrine which we have experienced over the last few hundreds or even thousands of years, which is considered sex as shameful and sinful, and the body is shameful, which means that a lot of us still carry around these feelings of shame and guilt around sexuality. Even if we're not Christian today, this legacy goes back a long time, and we still feel a lot of difficulty, many of us, in allowing in pleasure, of allowing ourselves to feel pleasure. And the author refers to this as body armoring, which is Wilhelm Reich's term. And essentially what that means is that once we start to de-armor, once we start to let go of some of that tension, some of that guilt, some of that shame that we feel around our bodies and sexualities, then we can allow pleasure to come in. And once pleasure can come in, the author says that this is the gateway that allows us to reconnect with the feeling of oneness of all there is. And he says that many ancient cultures knew this, and therefore they celebrated sexuality. In fact, many ancient cultures worshipped both gods and goddesses, and it was often goddess worship that was linked with sacred sexuality and worshipping sexuality. The symbol of the Great Mother is found in many ancient cultures throughout the world, many traditions from across the world. And this is something that started to change with the rise of agriculture. The author speaks that when agriculture came in, life started to change for people, life started to change for nomadic people and sedentary people, and essentially these changes that were happening in the ancient world led to the rise of cultures that were more male dominated, and this led to the suppression of both women and goddess worship and sexuality also, because these were all linked and associated with each other. So for example, ancient cultures used to have traditions which celebrated something called hieros gamos, which means sacred marriage, and this became suppressed over time. Sacred marriage was something that was reenacted in temples by the priest and the high priestess, as the reenactment of the holy intercourse between God and Goddess. In fact, many ancient cultures saw sex and sexuality as a very positive force. So it was common to find sacred sexual worship taking place in ancient temples. And this is a concept that we have pretty much completely lost today. So with the rise of a more male-dominated society, also prostitution became more common. Prostitution, using that word in the context that it is used more widely today. The sacred sexual worship was not something that was looked down on in ancient cultures. In fact, many women that practiced sacred sexual worship in temples were of high social standing. They came from wealthy families, they owned land, they owned property, so often they were looked on by society as valuable members of society, and certainly not regarded as prostitutes are regarded today. So as the rise of male-dominated cultures continued, the suppression of women continued. So even symbols that were associated with the goddess, such as the serpent, became considered evil, and the male priests wanted to eradicate any links between women, sexuality, and the worship of the divine. So all of those things became suppressed and forbidden to be expressed. Women were often forbidden to express their sexuality, and this is something that has carried on throughout the years. So the author also speaks about the rise of Christianity and how it saw the rise of the doctrine that considered sex as evil and the body as shameful. And he also speaks about that because this was happening not only in Christianity but in all of the world's main religions, such as Islam and Judaism, much of the tradition that was being suppressed went underground. So sometimes it would bubble up throughout the centuries and then go back underground. And this is sometimes referred as the mystery schools. So the author finishes by talking about the traditions of Tantrism and Taoism and their expression of sacred sexuality. So as a summary, this is a really great book as an introduction to sacred sexuality in different traditions around the world. You may be interested, if you're interested in goddess worship or the history of sexuality or Tantra, or any of the other related subjects that I've spoken about. The book answers some interesting questions, such as where does the word guilt come from, and what is the difference between guilt and shame. It also speaks about Giordano Bruno's beliefs about Eros, the sacred life force. Most of us know Giordano Bruno as the cosmologist who got burnt at the stake in 1600, but he also had some interesting views on sexuality. And it also answers the question of what did the Tantrics and Taoists think of semen retention techniques. So you can find all of those answers and more in the book, and if you'd like to read a longer review, then you can click on the link below and read a more detailed review of the book. And there's also a link where you can purchase a book if you would like to. So have a beautiful day. I'll be back next month with the review of another book. Thank you.